And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Pandemic is a cooperative game in which players are trying to stop diseases. In fact, it's a very noble cause in a sense. You know, you'll find people who have a problem with the themes of many different games because they don't like violence or they don't like whatever might be in the game. Pandemic is a game I can't imagine anybody having a problem with the theme because you're trying to stop diseases from spreading all over the world. It's a very difficult cooperative game. You can actually scale the level. On the easy level, you can beat it maybe 50, 60, 70% of the time. You know, you can beat it pretty often once you understand how to play the game. But on the medium or hard levels, it gets quite difficult, and yet I find it tremendously fun. Pandemic takes place over a map of the world, and the spread of diseases is shown by 4 different color cubes: yellow, black, blue, and red. The diseases aren't named. I suppose you can name them yourself. Players are represented by pawns, which are really gigantically huge. They don't really fit in the board too well. This has been fixed by the expansion, but I mean, it doesn't really cause too many problems. It just seems odd that they're so giant. But players are going to be moving these pawns around in the board. Basically, a player's turn works like this. On your turn, you have 4 actions. With those actions, you can move from space to space, following the red lines, moving around the board. If you're in a spot of city where there is infection, you can use an action to get rid of cubes in that city. For each action, you get rid of 1 cube. You can fly around from city to city as long as you have the appropriate card. For example, if I have this card, I can fly to Algiers. If I'm in Algiers, I can fly anywhere. And then the biggest thing, the most important thing of the game, is that if you're at a research station, you can use an action and discard 5 cards of the same color to cure the disease of that color. Once you've cured all 4 diseases, you've won the game. Sounds fairly easy. The problem is you need to get 5 cards of the same color. You can only have 7 cards in your hand, and the card deck, once it runs out, you lose the game. Still doesn't sound that difficult, but there's a problem. Each turn, you're turning over a certain number of these cards up here, which show where more cubes will be added to the game. Whatever city it shows, that's where you'll add a cube of the appropriate color of that disease. And as these cubes are being added, you know, the diseases are spreading. If you ever run out of cubes for one of the colors, well then, that's the end of the game for you also. But even more importantly, if you ever draw a cube for a city that already has 3 cubes, let's say we draw a card here for Manila, 3 cubes is the maximum a city can have, so an outbreak occurs and a cube is placed in every city that's adjacent to Manila, which would include San Francisco, all the way across the board since it goes around the world. And you can see that the diseases can spread very quickly. Also over here, whenever that happens, an outbreak marker is moved down. If the outbreak marker ever moves to 8, then players lose the game. But what makes the game really devastating are these cards here. As you turn them over, most of them are good cards that help you, cards that match the different cities on the board, and there's even some special cards that let you do different things that affect the outcome of the game. And knowing when to use those special cards can really help you out quite a bit. Like, for example, here's One Quiet Night, when we don't turn over any more of the infection deck back here. And knowing when to play those can help you win the game. But in the deck, you have these epidemic cards spread. And when you have one of these epidemic cards, 3 things happen. First, up here, you can see underneath the epidemic deck, there's a marker there, and this moves over 1. Once it moves over here to 3, we're going to start turning over 3 cards per turn. Even more deadly than that, you take the bottom card from the deck here, turn that over, and that city has had an outbreak in it, an infection, and so I have 3 cubes, let's say here to Taipei, and since there's already 1 there, an infection would happen, which could result in a chain reaction. And then, all these cards here that you've been turning over and putting infections are shuffled and put back on top of the deck, meaning that in the future, cities that have already been infected will be reinfected again. Now you're probably thinking that the game is tilted too much towards the disease. Well, the good thing is each player has a special ability, depending on what role you get. For example, the medic, when he goes around treating diseases, for 1 action he can take off all the cubes. The scientist only needs 4 cards to cure a disease. The operations expert can build more of these research stations around the area. Everybody can build them, but they have to use a card while he can build them for free. The dispatcher can move the other player's pawn. The researcher can give cards to another player. Normally you can give cards to another player, but you both have to be in the city. It's very difficult. The researcher can do it a lot easier. And so each player randomly selects a role, and they're trying to cure all 4 diseases. You can even eradicate a disease, which is even better than curing a disease, but you don't have to eradicate diseases to win. You basically just have to cure all 4 diseases, and as soon as you do that, you've won the game. Pandemic is a really fun game, and it gets really tense as players are trying to work together. I've heard some people complain that a dominant player can tell all the other players what to do. I just never had that happen in groups that I've been part of. I suppose it can be, but I mean, honestly, just work together, and the game can be a lot of fun. And you'll hear, well, you should do this, you should move here. It kind of feels like a puzzle in a sense, but you're up against a deadly enemy, and the virus just keeps seeming to spread. You can start games where you feel like you're doing okay, and it gets worse. The game difficulty is indicated basically by how many epidemic cards you put. 4 is the easy game, 5 is medium, and 6 is impossible. I beat the game quite often on the easy level. Only a few times have I ever beaten it on the medium level, and I won't even try on the hard level because I barely beat the medium level one. It's a tough game, and you have some good decisions to make, working together, deciding when to play cards. Cards are very precious commodities, and using them to fly around the board seems a lot more useful, than it really might be. There are some cards, reference cards, that show you what actions you can take on your turn. The special abilities seem balanced. The only one that might be a little bit weaker than the others is the operations expert who builds the research stations, but again, that's something they fixed in the expansion, but I never found him too bad before anyway. Either way, it's a lot of fun. Every game I play plays out completely differently. The mechanic of taking cards and putting them back on the deck to redraw and have infections come up in the same city works very well, and is very thematic. Yeah, it might be hard for some people to accept cubes as a disease, but all in all, it works well. I found that it works well with many ages. I've had upper elementary and teenagers fall in love with the game as we work together to stop diseases from taking over the world. One of the best cooperative games out there, and one of the best games there is.
Thanks for joining us today. For more written, audio, and video reviews, as well as the #1 board game podcast, check out the website at www.thedicetower.com. Until then, this is Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.